So if we think about all of the ways in which our judgments can be impaired by these environmental cues. So we've mentioned one, the language that's used to direct us to an event. You also spend some portion of the book talking about racial effects as well, the inferences that we draw from someone's race without really meaning to. When you start to add, and you have a number of these in the book, when you add them all up, you have to ask yourself, well, is a fair trial as we currently conduct them possible?
Based on the way the world works now,
yeah,
and based on your definition, what I assume your definition of fairness is, I don't really think so. I think some of the conclusions that you have to draw from some of the studies is no, based on the way the world works. And I think the clearest example of this is there are studies that show that if you look at people who've committed very grave crimes and you look at African American defendants, you can classify their faces according to how typically African American or black they look. And what you find is that the more typically African American they look, the more likely they are to receive the death penalty for exactly the same crime. The only difference here in those cases is the way their faces look.
yeah.
It's hard to argue that that's fair and that there's a way to overcome that because people have no idea that they're doing that. I should say this is only when there's a white victim, which is perhaps even more disturbing.
Yeah.
But the fact that this is true and that people don't know they're doing it, that they're being swayed, suggests that it's incredibly difficult to overcome these effects.
Is there no dialogue between social psychologists and people in the legal profession over these kinds of effects?
There is. There's plenty of dialogue. They have a lot of discussions about it. I just think it's not really clear how you can undo some of the effects. So we talk a lot about this, the nature of discounting. So what we try to do when we have these pieces of information is discount them. And you want to basically be able to chop them out from any of the judgments we're making, cast them aside, and then make the judgment as though that piece of information that's biasing you is no longer present. It's not infecting your judgment anymore. But often the lines are so blurry that you can't just cut them out. You can't excise them completely.
But wait a minute. There are some things. I've always wondered about this. So just the thing that you were talking about, the disparity in sentences between blacks and whites for the same offense, isn't the logical answer to that that the defendant in a trial should never be seen? I've never understood this. Why does the jury have to see the defendant? And all the reasons people give me are so bogus. Well, I need to see them because I need to judge whether they're lying or not. Well, everything we know from social psychology says you can't tell whether they're lying or not. So it's all more of the same. It's people's they continually want to claim that they're better at making social judgments than they actually are. So why not just take the person out of the room?
I think that's pretty compelling. So you talk about that in Blink a little bit about having people when they're auditioning for an orchestra to be behind a curtain rather than visible. I talk about it a little bit, or think about it a little bit in the domain of chess. It's a strange domain to talk about it. But there's some evidence that if you play chess, if you're a heterosexual male and you're playing chess against a very attractive female opponent, you'll make many riskier moves. You end up losing more often. And this has been shown in a long analysis, a long-term analysis, long-ranging looking at lots of games played by chess grandmasters. So the very most rational, brilliant, expert chess players are falling prey to this bias. I think in a lot of domains we could remove these effects by removing the image, which is causing the effects. So if you play chess effectively as though you were playing against a computer, you don't really have an opponent, you just see the moves being made. That would remove that part of the effect. But then, of course, knowing the way people have played in the past, so this doesn't apply to the legal domain, but in chess it helps to know who you're playing against, to know what moves they've made in the past, as with any sport, with tennis, with any game like that.
Yeah.
So you don't want to remove that. Maybe you could know who you're playing against without actually seeing them.
Yeah. But, you know, some of these effects that you've been talking about have been known for some time. And yet it is astonishing how little impact our knowledge of these effects has made on the way the real world operates. Why is that?
I think sometimes the link between the effect, understanding that the effect exists and knowing what to do is critical. So one of the things I've talked about is we know that when people donate to hurricane aid after a hurricane, this is one of the name effects that is apparently, even Uri seems to think this one's real, that when you donate to a hurricane, you are likely to donate about 50% more if the hurricane happens to share your initial. So for Hurricane Katrina, Kevin's and Ken's and Kim's donated much more than they did for Hurricane Mitch, and Marty's and Malcolm's donated much more for Mitch than Katrina. The question is, what do we do with this? It's kind of fascinating. Well, one thing we could do is we could change the way we name hurricanes. So if you look at the hurricane lists, every year they have 6 different lists for the Atlantic hurricane season. They've been using them since the 50s. And they cycle down the list from A to, I think the last letter might be a V or a W. And they go down the list and they pick these hurricanes. And it's done because it's convenient. You don't want to have to refer to longitude and latitude. What we could do, though, is look at the demographic makeup of the US and the names and find that maybe the wealthiest people happen to have names that begin with a certain initial, or that there are many more people with M names and A names and J names, and therefore we should name more of our hurricanes M, A, and J names. And
I would think that we'd want to name all our hurricanes B and G for Buffett and Gates.
Buffett and Gates. Or you can do that. Or we could just pick one. Every hurricane is Hurricane Gates.